And I'd like to get just, if anybody out there has any thoughts, what is important for you? I mean, what do you want to get out of this? Anybody? Lunch?
I think search is becoming such a sort of universal foundation for a personal organization. I'm interested in seeing how it integrates into other UI, particularly like the shell.
Mm-hmm.
Until and we're building browsers on top of the MS Search database. And so browsing isn't really searching, but it leverages a lot of the same technology and moves forward together.
So in that sense, it's more personal stuff and the idea of using those databases, personal databases, et cetera, or?
Well, just how search just becomes sort of ubiquitous functionality within all our organizational tools.
Okay. Anything else? Ideas?
I'm really interested in similarities and or differences between internet search versus intranet search. So enterprise business needs versus, MSN search, whole world internet kind of thing. And then also advanced search versus basic search. So faceted metadata type driven search versus just the box and over.
Just keyword and that's it, huh? Okay, cool. Well, so some of that I've got up here. So these are some interesting big topics that I thought we might get at over the course of this kind of thing. One of them is faceted search, exactly that. I think that's a really big topic, and it's near and dear to my heart as an interesting place to be looking. There's a lot of things that can apply to in a lot of different places. So that's one. Another one that we thought would be a good thing to talk about is temporal issues. Now, temporal issues can mean a lot of different things, but for instance, one thing is at an interactive basis, whenever you're interacting with a system, how fast does the response happen back to you, and how does that change how your interactivity occurs with it? If you have to wait 3 seconds for a response, that's going to change the kind of interaction that you're going to have with it, and it's the kind of UI that you can actually build on top of it. If it's really quick and it's completely interactive, that's a different experience altogether. And there's another thing which is just about using time as an organizing principle. So that's a different different piece of sort of temporal notions in search. Another one that a lot of people are looking at now is in pictures or other kinds of vertical search. You've got your domain. It's actually fairly narrow. And then how do you generate UI for searching within that very narrow domain? What kind of new things are people doing? What else can we do in that kind of space? And then exactly at the opposite end is heterogeneous search. Now you're going across all kinds of types, and there's an awful lot of metadata or properties or other things that don't apply but to a very small subset of these things. Well, how do you bubble any of that up? How do you search across all these different kinds of heterogeneous data? How do you do that? What's good about that? What's not to be done there? And final thing that I came up with was personalized search. Creating search that's catered to unique individuals, sort of what you're a special person in the world there, and what can the system know about you or deal with you to come up with search that's catered just to your needs, hopefully. Any other ideas?
I think on that list, personalized categorization can benefit globalized search. Dr. Roddy just started using everybody's categories on their blog post as a way of categorizing stuff. And delicious is another way of applying personal tags that then kind of go into the global good. And then maybe delicious doesn't quite get all the juice out of that particular thing. But I think there's a lot of cool stuff that
CIO.US. And then Technorati is using the same database, or is it a separate thing?
Use just categories on blog posts.
Ah. Okay. That's really good. Yeah? So the state of the machine versus maybe the person as an individual, or okay. Okay. Yeah, Lily.
So I guess I was thinking of it maybe even more general than the search, more of like a query-oriented UI. So what happens if you start sharing queries, or you know, figure out all the RSS feeds that people have, and share those out with people and start using these. So I've been thinking of it more as query-oriented UI, which about, so I would include in that one sharing notifications.
No, just like subscriptions.
Oh. What did you mean by getting queries?
Spam queries.
Oh, I see.
That's what I was like.
Right. Other ideas? Great. Generally, or just, okay? Big topic. Yes, Tim?
Are these topics for discussion as part of the reading group, or could we also, I'm wondering if, you know, I know that a lot of people in this room have probably worked on many of these things, and it would be nice for them to have an opportunity to get feedback from all of us, or to do us. So I don't know, is this primarily going to be focused on reading and the use of literature, or?
Well, that gets to the next point I wanted to make, actually. So one of the things that I wanted to get out of this when I first was thinking about it was, as a reading group, is an excuse for me to actually get up to date on this backlog of stuff that's been published, et cetera. But in discussion with Sue and some others, it's like, well, you know, a lot of what's really cool that's out there and what's interesting, nobody's written anything about. They've just built it. And it's out there, and people have talked about it. Now, within the company, people have built a lot of stuff. They've tested it. They've done work with it. They've abandoned it, or they've built on it, whatever else. There's a lot of knowledge there that's just waiting to be shared that I think would be great if we could talk about. So to some extent, it occurs to me that I would like this to be a reading group if there's stuff to read on it. But often there's not. And I would be, I think, pleased as punch if somebody wanted to talk about some of their experience with X, Y, or Z on any of these kinds of topics and go into it. Did you have a particular idea in mind there for that? Or?
It's just that I've seen different search interfaces throughout the company, and it would be nice to know if they had some research backing for what they were doing, or you know, if they wanted to get feedback from people there with different, diverse, you know, backgrounds. So forth.
Okay.
There's just a lot out there.
Right.
This is a
Right.
place to get
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Do you all just want to read multiple papers every week?
Well, Ed, I would point out, we
Yeah.
did this thing, remember like last year where Kyle, we had this sort of come to Jesus experience about like we all need to work better together with search, and we had a bunch of spin-off working groups that came out of that. And I led the working group that came out around Search UI, and what happened, I'd hate to see this kind of go down a similar path, what happened there was for about two and a half months, there was a lot of interesting sort of come and share, like SharePoint come and talk, like MS Web come and talk about like the problems you're doing in search, but without having an actionable to come out of that. Like it really was sort of like a lot of, okay, well, maybe I agree with you, maybe I don't, but now I know what you did, and I'll go back and work on my next version of the product. And so in terms of setting whatever kind of goal, like what are the things we want to get out of it, is just to sort of raise more awareness, because I think we have tried to do that in the past, and it's kind of, I won't say it hasn't gone anywhere, but it's been kind of like a sort of like, oh, that's interesting. And if we're trying to get more convergence out of that, then we might try and think about other ways to structure it.
Okay. Well, do you have any ideas?
No.
I came here because I'm really interested in. I wasn't sure what the impetus of the get together was. I do think without a common product goal, that it's really hard for folks at Microsoft to collaborate. So I guess maybe that sounds cynical or a cynical piece of feedback, but without attaching some of this stuff to something that we're trying to produce, I think it's hard to be more than just sort of interacting about it.
Okay. No, that's well taken. And to some extent, I don't know that I'm interested in driving a particular topic. I mean, a particular product kind of a goal there. And I think that would probably be too specific for a lot of people here as well. But I think your point is well taken. And there may be a lot of you that just sort of like want to drop in once or twice if something interesting is happening and then go on from there.
But that could be, like an item. There could be a group of people who really are more interested in that. Post and things about so that it's like, you want to build on MSF search. What are some what the API is?
I mean, I think really your group is actually in a particularly interesting position where you are researching, but you also do a lot of prototyping and sort of product development. I mean, if there's stuff on this list that you sort of like, hey, we haven't spent a lot of cycles on, like, I'm sure that I think your group for him would be a great sort of seed to get.
Yeah. Right, right. So given that, and especially given sort of this broad range of ideas here, one of the things, when I originally set this up, I was thinking of biweekly. And there's a question, is that too infrequent for people, or is it actually too frequent for anybody to actually make Monday? So would weekly be better for people? I mean, anybody have any opinions about this? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads.
I think you're trying to make a dent in the show and tell backlog for a lot of folks, but weekly I think would be good to start off.
Okay.
And that's what we found when we did the last 2 hours. There's kind of a big backlog of I have a lot to show and I want to hear it.
Okay. Well, I was thinking we might also do a sprinkling of sort of the show and tell and sort of reading as well, or sort of more specific, focused, topic-based kind of thing. As an idea for the next meeting, my initial thought was to focus on, say, faceted search kind of thing. There's been some good papers that have been written about this. Some of you have probably read some of them, some of you haven't. And I thought I could send out some of those. And what I would really like to do is get a lot of people to think about it in specific, if there are specific products or tools or places that you know that you've seen that you like or don't like the way they've done this, or there's something special about it, to sort of include those. We'll do this on the DL, and we'll have sort of as a compilation of probably one person talking about some of the papers and presenting that, and somebody else, if you want to talk about some of these particular artifacts and how they do whatever they do, then they can present that at the same time. We can sort of do that as the next meeting. Are people good for coming next week, or so do you want to just do that, and we'll just say next week anyway, and we'll make it that, and if things get too frequent, then we can push it out to every other week. Okay. Well, I don't want to...
It will be like a paper plus 3 or 4 specific instances.
Right. So we'll do a paper. We'll have the homework. You'll have to actually read the paper, and then hopefully have like 3 or 4 big systems. I already know of like several that we could probably use, and you guys probably come up with even better ones. And so I'll probably send out a mail this afternoon, giving a link to the paper and a couple of prototype examples, and then if you can sort of feed that list, and we can talk about and get it what we want to talk about. I'm just, in this case, by fiat. But in the future, I'd love to hear people recommend papers, things that they want to talk about. that would be great because I assume that I would be giving this paper, but if somebody would prefer to do that, then that would be fine too. Yes?
One thing that I'm interested in is more in the field of usability. I keep getting this feeling that what we've got for search now sort of works halfway. It doesn't really work very well in the process of navigating and finding the information you want. And you can't tell what works until you actually try it with people. So the question is, are there people in the usability area who've done a lot of work on this, have some insight, collection of things that work, and collection of things that don't, things that confuse people, and things that help others people.
That's great, yeah. Yeah, George?
I'd be interested in knowing if there's anything published on search for really large databases. I'm working on something for the government that involves,
There's Google.
for example, 120 billion documents.
Okay.
And I don't know of any techniques that would really work on that. So I'll give it a advantage.
That's interesting, yeah. Anything else? All right, well,
deliverables and sort of focusing things. It would be wonderful if something came out of this like identification of sort of strategic gaps, more predictions about where it's all headed, because everyone kind of sees the motion, but it really feels like a lot of reactive work. We're all responding to Google now, but do we really know what Google is going to do next? And do we really know where desktop's going to go?
so you were saying that for specific there is just, there's the identification of the gaps, et cetera, but then
Sort of
the,
taxonomy of search issues would be great, and specific strategic recommendations.
This is very different than you are. I think most of those issues are not evaluated.
I totally disagree, actually. I think we're potentially in the middle of a sea change in UI, getting away from folders and sitting on top of queries instead, and there's issues all over the place. You just watch what the Longhorn guys went through in their design process. It's really big UI.
I know Steve's really familiar with that work. Were you thinking it, I mean, I can see that.
I think strategic issues,
Right.
whether it's, UI has had the trouble with whether it's succeed or not, but whether you want to get into it, I think it's largely.
I think there, maybe this is a trivial thing to say, but I think it's definitely user experience that defines those things. And maybe we're just scoping out the UI, like that whole question of how do you structure your user experiences, I think determines whether the user direction is going to go. Maybe that's what you're talking about.
Maybe part of the direction would be more like best practices or something.
It's better to start with what's wrong with what we've got, because there's not much point in just going over what we've already figured out. It's better to say, okay, now what is broken about this particular pattern of UI? What is it that gets in the way? What causes confusion? Are you talking about using metrics to track where people go, or how they track that kind of information to find out what's wrong? Because I've seen surveys where people will tell you what they like and what they don't like, yet if you were able to do metrics on it, not necessarily, they may not remember or they may not be sure why they're doing that. Well, if you want to make it quite objective, instead of just feeling things aren't right, you do usability tests. You start saying, okay, this is what I want people to find. This is the description I give them. Here's how they get set up for the search. How successful are they? And in observing, go through the process of figuring out the answers they're trying to go for, what things get them stuck? What things tend to be organizing principle that help guide them in the direction to get to the answer? What things are matters of confusion? That's what I was getting at. Those are the things where I think search is still not in very good shape. If it gets to the point where you have to think about what you're doing, you're looking for an answer, you have to say, do as much thinking as construct a regular expression, we're in the wrong direction. You need to have a way in which going toward the answer feels pretty natural and doesn't take a lot of thinking along the way.
Who's responsible for usability?
Yeah, she and several of that team are down in Phoenix right now on a site visit. So that's part of the reason why I was wanting to record this, because they had all asked for that as well.
I think one of the real challenging problems we have with search is that it doesn't fit well. Because within Microsoft, you have this, sort of cognitive, like one-way mirror or the feasibility test, like each 10 person looks at it. And my experience in the search, like the broad category, doesn't lend itself well to evaluation in that model because of a lot of times the data is very artificial to them, so their sense of what the right answer is or isn't is blurred. And so there's also an acclimation period that with using a tool like search that we never really get to experience in the lab. And so like one of the things that I know like Trish and Susan Gaddis have worked on is thoughts of how we do more kind of diary studies and externalize like instrumented versions of products. And I think that alone is an interesting question when we're trying to evaluate such a user experience or user interface in search, how we shift out of being like 10 to 12 people into 2 hours into the lab to watch them is a really
Okay. So that could be a whole topic. Why don't we just put evaluation down? And
I'd like to move on. I want to be sure that Sue gets a chance to give this talk if the live view came here for that anyway.
Right.
So,
yeah, actually, what I wanted to do is just try to seed some of our thinking about a variety of rich issues in the search arena. And I gave a version of this when Adrian organized the other group, but I thought I'd just do a fast forward here looking at just 2 classes of issues and raising a number of problems about what we do today, what crazy off-the-wall things we might do, just to get people thinking about alternative visions of search, and that may stimulate some future discussion. So I guess I want to start out by arguing, and it's probably not such a controversial issue to folks here, that the search UI today is very consistent and limited. And then I want to talk about there are a whole ton of issues having to do with search, ranging from things like what are user needs, how do you understand them, how do you support them, how do you allow users to I have it down here as query specification, but it's really how do you allow them to specify what they're interested in and help them in solving their problem, how you present results, how you allow users to evaluate the results. The answer might not be one thing, it might not be a half dozen things. So how you support a wide range of input options as well as results presentations. In all of this, as Ed noted earlier, there's been an awful lot of, there are a lot of prototype systems that try one-off things. There's an awful lot less systematic research. And part of what would be really good here is to sit down and think about what research has been done, where the gaps are, as well as what the prototypes are teaching us that we might want to study further. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I've phrased this as typical web search experience, but I think a lot of other search environments look an awful lot like this. So I'll talk about it generically as web search because I think all of us know what I mean when I say that. But I also mean things like searching the desktop, searching databases, and you'll see some of those bleed in at various points. So right now when you search, it's actually amazing. You get this rectangular box, you type in something, hit carriage return, and get a big long list of items, often hundreds of thousands, of which you see 10 or 20 on the first page, along with a title, some short summary, and often a URL. That's one of the most impoverished interfaces imaginable. I mean, it's hard to imagine tying people's hands more behind their backs than something like this. And so what I want to do is just take a step back and think about how we can improve on various aspects of that. I mean, and what happens once you get this big list of results? You follow a result. You might go back. You might hit next or previous results at the bottom of the ranked list. You might do some advanced search things. But if this isn't what you want, what do? You just try again. There's no way to say this is on the right track, these 3 things are reasonable, this is junk, find me more stuff like this. So again, this is really simple, impoverished, and this is the sort of thing that we currently have. And so what I'm going to do in the next few slides is talk about how we can improve both the specification of the query, the little rectangle on top, and then the presentation of results. The other thing is that this is all very desktop-centric. So what happens when you have a small device like a phone or a PDA? What happens when you have a large device or a room like this? Can you take advantage of that? And I think we don't know very much about that. There are very, very few studies about how to do presentation or input on either a very large or small. So before I start, I want to say a little bit about information needs. There's a tremendously wide spectrum of needs that people have when they use web search engines. Andre Broder and Dan Rose and Dan Levinson have done some nice work trying to characterize what users are looking for. And even in the context of web, there are at least a half dozen kinds of things that people do when they go to web search engines. One is what Andre Broder calls an informational need, where you want to find out about something. So you might want to find out about the history of space travel. That's a very different task than what he calls a navigational task, which is basically I want to get to some page. So if I type in ESPN, I probably want to go to the homepage of ESPN. If I type in Susan Dumais, I probably want to go to my homepage. You need different algorithms, and you may need very different interfaces to support those. He also talks about transactional searches, which are basically requests for information on how to do something. So where do I download music? How do I buy a TV? And then there are all question answering things, which are even more specific than navigational. What's the diameter of the Earth? That may require a very different ranking algorithm, search algorithm, as well as interface. And so the main point of this is simply that people have lots of different information needs. Right now, you get exactly the same interface and the same results and the same ranking for all of them. And so you may want different ranking, different query specification and results presentation for different needs. You may also want additional support for some of these richer information needs. If you're trying to gather information about a topic or understand a new topic area, it may not be enough to just get a bunch of ranked lists and keep trying. You may want support for storing away intermediate results, for visualizing patterns. And so I think it's, Marcia Bates, if people haven't read it, has an interesting paper where she talks about berry picking, where people do an initial query, see something, branch off in different ways, and pick sort of little berries along the way, sometimes getting back to their main search requests. So that's typically in support of informational needs, but I think it happens pretty generally. Okay, so I just did a screenshot of, I don't know, what is it, 10 interfaces for specifying queries. So what I'm going to do now is focus a little bit the next 4 or 5 slides on query specification and the next 4 or 5 after that on results presentation. But I just looked at a bunch of different search sites over the weekend, and the query boxes look very similar in all of them, except actually with the notable exception of betasearchmsn.com, which has the smallest query window. I have no clue why. When this happened on MSN before, there were implications for revenue. I don't know why it was done again, but we have, with that exception, everybody has a rectangle. Ours is smaller than the rest for reasons that escape me. Okay, so the query specification is a simple box. You type in some words. You can do some advanced query syntax. But operators are seldom used. Fewer than 10% of the people, if you look at query logs, use operators. So what you want to do is get the defaults right. One of the interesting things is that the early search engines used an or as the connector between two words. So if I type in Susan Dumais, I would get pages that contain Susan or Dumais, often with surprising results to end users. The default is now and. So I think web is actually very interesting in that regard and probably different than the intranet or your own desktop. One of the things that the web, because of its linkage patterns, allows you to do is get close and then navigate to what you want. And an and there may actually be just fine. Ands in the context of intranet or maybe your own desktop often over-constrain the search. So it's interesting to think about trade-offs depending on your application. Right, so stop words are usually ignored. Proximity is usually used. And not much else is done to the queries. They're taken very literally. On the web, again, I think this is probably okay. There may be lots of variants of, let's take something other than Susan Dumais, information retrieval. You might call that IR. People tend not to do query expansion, I think in part because they use the anchor text as pointers into pages and by the nature of the web get query expansion for free. That's not as true in other contexts. Yeah?
Is skimming ordinarily done? You always
No, almost nobody does stemming. Yep. But in some ways you get it for free because you have anchor text that points to your home page. So people point to your home page. They may say, somebody else may use, GGR as a pointer to your home page. So you get some kinds of synonyms and some kinds of stemming for free in the context of the web. Almost nobody does it. There are examples where people are doing it on the web in very carefully, I would say. And again, part of that is, I think, the nature of the information needs. So a lot of the information needs on the web are navigational. You want to get to a page, and you probably don't want to get to a page that sort of sounds like something or looks sort of like it or is the plural of it. But not very much additional processing is done on the query typically. So let me talk about some other trends, I think, in query specification. One of the things that the MSN toolbar and desktop search do really nicely, I think, is allow users to specify queries in context. So instead of having to bring up a separate application to do your search, you can do a search on the desk bar, you can do a search in IE, you can do a search in Outlook. And it's a very simple thing, but I think it's a huge win from the user's perspective. They don't have to stop and think about where they are and whether they can search from here. So somebody brought up the notion that if you do searches in context like this, you might also be able to inform the search based on where I am. So if I'm searching an email, you might want different things than if I'm searching from the web. If I'm searching with a particular web page up in front of me, you might be able to bias search results to take that into account. So the minute you start looking at search much more in the context of ongoing work, I think you can do richer things both in presentation and maybe even in query processing. Yep.
So could you comment on still your entry-level user, comment on the complexity of visual layout as well, and how easy to find search and what you want to do with search? If you're an entry-level user,
Yep.
how approachable is search within that UI?
I'm not sure I can. No, I understand it, and I have lots of complaints. Huh?
You want to feel very cluttered.
Very cluttered.
Overall, you want the application, not just search, but the application itself.
Sure.
You want to feel very cluttered. It took it long to get.
There are lots of issues for people. There are issues for people. I don't want to spend a lot of time on any of these details. That's an absolutely critical one. I think more and more what you're finding, though, is that people look for a rectangle. So if you have a search option that is typed in ASCII text with a hyperlink, people are really slow to find that. So I think people are now looking for a rectangle, and when you present results, they ignore everything that's on top of the first result. If you do eye movement studies. So I think people are getting used to for better or worse, a sort of consistent way of specifying queries and looking at results. But you're absolutely right. What does it mean when I click this? What if I click this button instead of hitting carriage return? There are lots of issues, but I'd rather not. Can I not talk about those here? Although that is probably a great topic for future things. What I want to talk about is some other ways of specifying queries that might obviate some of the need for users to actually explicitly ask queries. Right, so one of the things that Google and Yahoo both do is infer a query type. They actually process queries differently depending on what they are. So you can type in one Microsoft Way, Redmond, Washington, and you see one of the first results is a map. So some specific patterns of queries like, flight numbers, UPS tracking numbers, addresses are interpreted automatically. You get what's interesting is it doesn't take over the whole UI. So you don't get just these results. You don't get a map pop up in front of you. You get that as a likely alternative along with the standard search results. Okay, and we're seeing some of that. People also are doing query by selection. So sweep out a region, hit search. You can do this already this is an example from stuff I've seen. You can do it in Office's reference pane. Sweep out a region, hit search, the query goes off. Okay, so that's another way of specifying a query that gives you a very rich contextual setting for the query. Another thing that here's another example. We could probably do a lot more of this in tablet. This is work from the Ex Libris system. by Gene Golubshinsky. But what they did as queries is whenever you're taking margin notes, highlighting stuff, they would use that as a query either based on explicit specification or implicitly find stuff that's related to what you're highlighting and circling and so on. So again, it's a very different way of specifying queries than typing things. Okay, one of the extremes of that is an implicit query system that we built, and others have explored this in the context of remembrance agents, Watson, Kenjan, Blinks, and the community bar that the folks in the text mining group are looking at is yet another example of this. In this example, as I'm reading an email message, what we do is actually automatically retrieve items that are related to it without the user ever typing anything. So as you're reading or working with something, we can find related items. I would note that doing this algorithmically is trivial. The hard thing here is presenting it in a way that isn't so annoying to users that they want to bop you over the head. And also that makes the results quickly understandable at a glance. You don't want people to spend all the time looking at the results because then they might as well have typed in a query. So I think there are some real UI challenges in doing this in a way that doesn't feel heavy-handed for users. This is another example from the community bar that the text mining group is doing. When you're looking at a page, you can find annotations on that page, in links, similar pages, again, without ever typing a query. These are things that are quick links, essentially, or related to your current context. Okay, and those are all asked for you automatically. So it may mean the query specification then becomes a bit more different, at least, let's say. We won't call it simpler. Mike Lynch, a couple years ago, had this interesting quote where he said, typing keywords into search engines will seem as ridiculous as hand cranking a car in a few years' time. And I think it's important to think about whether there are ways that we can capture a lot about what people are doing and find things that are related for them, still leaving them in control. So I don't want to take over the whole screen. I don't want to not allow you to ask queries. But I think there's a lot we can do in thinking about richer ways of specifying queries. There's a lot done on query refinement. We've all seen spelling suggestions. One of the interesting things about spelling suggestions, so this is another way of asking a query, right? It's a lot easier than typing in a query saying, oh shit, I didn't find what I want. Maybe I didn't, oh yeah, maybe I spelled it wrong. Or worse yet, looking through 40 pages of results before figuring out that you spelled it wrong. So this is a simple thing. Marissa Mayer gave a talk last week at the Bay Chi group where she talked about this as one example of work where a lot of details matter. So they started out apparently with an algorithm that was not as good as the one they currently use for spelling correction. The system wasn't used very much. They also had the did you mean blah was much longer. Like, could you possibly have mistyped this word and did you instead consider it? And, people were just scrolling over this. So they shortened, first of all, they got a better spelling correction algorithm and it increased usage by a factor of 2. They did a little short, big, red, bold, did you mean? That increased usage by another factor of 2. The did you mean also appears at the bottom of the page because people would look for things, scroll down to the bottom, not find what they want, and if the did you mean is down there, that increased usage again by a factor of 2. So it's not that the idea was bad, it's that some of the early implementations were bad. We talked a little bit about how to evaluate this. This was evaluated certainly doing some in-house laboratory experiments, but a lot of it was complemented by usage logs in the field. So what did people do before and after their initial, how did they refine queries? What were the query refinement patterns? How did that correlate with verbatim feedback that they sent in about the feature? So people would often complain that the system wasn't finding what they wanted when in fact their previous query had been a typo. Okay, so all of these, getting the details right is absolutely critical, and I thought this was a nice example of the different methods as well as the constant iteration to get increases in usage of a factor of 6 over their original attempt at this. Other groups have looked at when you type in a query suggesting alternative queries that you might want. So in this case I typed in MSN and on the right is a list of other things that I might mean by that, a way to refine my query. The Alta Vista group has done a lot of really nice work on this. A paper by Peter Annick at SIGIR 2003 talks about lots of ways of generating these alternatives as well as evaluating it with a live study on Alta Vista over the course of, I guess, a month or so, looking at what people actually selected. Google suggests, if people played with this, okay, this is sort of a real-time suggestion of alternatives. What's interesting here is that both the expansion via a little drop-down list is something that already existed in the field. Alternative suggestions is something that already existed in the field. In fact, Simplify Find had done something very much like this about 3 years ago, but they just didn't have the rich data set, and the alternatives were really lame. And so again, this is a case where I think they pulled together a variety of ideas that were almost there and did it in a way that's at least interesting. I don't know if it's useful, but it feels, it's fast and it seems interesting. And again, another way to help people specify queries. I mean, I don't know what I would do without this sort of thing. Not your prior queries. It's based on some combination of, I assume I don't know what it's based on. We can speculate.
Even at the simplest level, it helps with spell check.
Right. So, I mean, I don't know how many. I use this constantly in the address bar. And I never remember the full path of something I've been to. I just remember the beginning of it. And this is a way to do very much like that. So, again, it's just another way of specifying queries. You start typing stuff. It will fill in. Exactly what it fills in, I think, doesn't matter as much as the fact that it fills in what presumably are useful ways. I mean, you can see whether people ever pick these. You can vary the algorithm you use by watching what people pick.
Do you have any idea if that's created?
I do not know. They do a lot of stuff where they randomize the order of things, not where they change the order of things in a way that allows them to look at which of the algorithms that they're trying works best. So I don't know if they're permuted or not. But I assume that it varies over time, if not over individuals. Okay, another thing that people have done is look at category refinements. Microsoft used to do this. Google used to do this, where you type in a word and you see possible categories of things that you might have meant. These were done using the LookSmart directory, I guess. Google's was done using DMOZ, or the Open Directory. Both of them have disappeared.
On that, you pointed out a lot of times when an idea was tried, and it disappeared for some reason, that's the method of implementation. This kind of speaks to some of the problems in doing good research about this, which is that, you can't quite tell why it's not used, with the corpus, the algorithm, with the people's familiarity with the concept, all these things. So at some point I could figure out how can we do effective research. Mining the logs is one thing.
Right. Now, that's an excellent point. I mean, a lot of these, there are things that seem like great ideas that either nobody uses or you can't figure out a way to get people to use them. Those you may want to.
I mean, one of the problems, it's not always the case the idea is a bad idea for user experience. But for example, MSN Search, one of the problems was that we were selling placement for advertisements in the top of the page. It was also the same place. All these things were done through editorial links to our sync sets. And the click traffic there was basically stealing money out of the MSN.
So there may be business reasons for for some of these decisions. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Right. Yep. And I actually have a set of slides later that shows how to integrate categories and lists. And even on the Google site, there are 3 different ways of doing it. So I think people are trying things. It may be that different domains need different things. Okay, let me talk a little bit more about query refinement. People have done things like this that show you relationships among terms. So if you type in president, you can see, in this case, it's done from a thesaurus. So you can see relationships among these terms. Others have built these kinds of networks based on code query patterns, textual similarity, a lot of different ways of building these things. But again, as a user, you type in president and you say, oh yeah, maybe I want president of the United States. Let me select that. They all failed.
I don't see any wide use.
Yeah, well, you didn't see the query suggestions in wide use until recently. So yeah, it's hard for a lot of these things that you don't see to know whether it's a lame idea, the implementation is bad, the source of the data is bad. So I'm not sure that I have an answer that says if fewer than 2% of the people use it and you've tried 3 alternative ways, dump it. It might be that the 2% of users who use it needed in absolutely critical situations. So there's no great rule of thumb. You certainly don't see stuff like this.
But there are products like that today.
Oh, there are absolutely products like this. This is from Visual Thesaurus. They sell it. They sell it to a lot of schools. Alta Vista used to actually have something that I rather liked that did something like this. I used it a fair amount, but I guess I was not enough traffic. MSN, in their new beta, has a way to help users specify additional parameters of the query. So in this case, you can vary what the popularity, I can't even see it, the quality of the match, the popularity, and something else, right? So I can tweak knobs that say I want more popular sites, or I want more recent sites, or I want sites that match better, and I can set the weights on this. It might be fun to spend part of a time doing thinking about an optimal UI for this. It's interesting sometimes. I find it sort of completely out of my control because I tweak it something, hit carriage return, and something else happens, and I don't know what it was. So there are probably better ways of keeping the user in control. But one of the interesting ideas is that it allows the user to ask a richer query without having to specify in the command line query : popularity : blah, frequency : blah. So it's yep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that as they add more, it takes stuff away. I mean, why does it take stuff away? It takes stuff away because there's an implicit and. If there was an implicit or, it would add stuff. I mean, you know an awful lot about there's an interesting paper that I think Wanda Pratt did for SIG-IR 2003 or 2003 on people's explanations for how search engines work, and they are nowhere near as lucid as the ones we've heard here today. And ours may be completely wrong, too. Wanda Pratt did a paper. I can send around a pointer to a few of these after. Let me talk about another way of feeding back. So another way of feeding back, this is explicit control of parameters or metadata. I'll talk a little bit about metadata later. Another thing that is done a lot in the information retrieval research community and almost never successfully in interfaces is something called relevance feedback. And the idea here is you see it a little bit in Google, you saw it in Excite, is find similar pages. Right, so here's a way where I, as a user, don't have to worry about what crazy combination of words to use to get stuff like this coming back. So maybe I do a search, I find out that this is relevant, it's on the right track, and I can ask for similar pages. So Google does it in a way that's independent of the query. Excite, with their more like this, used to do it in a way that was dependent on the query. So if I happen to have this page up, CIIR, and I type find similar pages, the query is ignored. In the Excite case, it was not ignored. It actually was used to further bias results. But there are even richer notions of feedback in information retrieval where you mark items that you think are particularly good, right? So, and you do it on an item-by-item basis. So as you're reading, you might say, oh, this item is not very good. The item below it's very good. It's incredibly tedious for users, but there are at least two uses for something like this. One is you can use it to tune a ranking algorithm. So if I know that the first three things are really lame for everybody who ever issues this query, then I can take advantage of that. The other thing you can do is use it in this relevance feedback way to say, oh, they like these two things, not these. Let me modify the query in a way that gets more like what people were interested in. It's a great UI challenge to get this to be something that people will actually use in practice. What's that? It absolutely is, but I think that's true about the quality of search results. The two of us can get exactly the same results back, and I could be really happy with them, and you could say, oh, this is so lame. And what search engines have to do by virtue of the fact that very few of them have personalization, is try to serve the masses. But this sort of thing works well in the lab if you force people to do it, and I think a real key might be to think of ways to get that kind of feedback in the field. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears for the next 5 or 10 minutes and talk a little bit about results presentation. So what I hope I've done in the last 3 or 4 slides is just talk about ways of specifying a query that go above and beyond type in a keyword. I think Sumit's right. If you know exactly what you want, I love the advanced syntax features of things like desktop search. I always say, from Sumit, path colon, blah, blah, blah. That's a case where I know a lot about the metadata, and it's information I've seen before, and so I can articulate what those constraints are. There's a lot of other stuff where I have no clue what the metadata is or what the values are. But I think there are lots of different ways of specifying what you're interested in. We just went through maybe 20 different ways of doing it that are different than typing in keywords. And I think those are at least worth keeping in the back of our minds as we think about the search experience, and also how it integrates with browsing. So search and browsing right now are 2 different things. They should be much more tightly coupled than they are. And I think part of what Dan and Ed are looking at in their flat system is really the unification of those 2 metaphors in a very fundamental way. Okay, so in terms of results presentation, again, I think there's a lot of consistency. What you get is a big long list. You get the title, a short query relevant summary, and the URL. People have looked at putting in thumbnails, but this is typically what you get on the web. I don't want to say anymore. What I want to talk a little bit about is how you combine a list of results with individual pages. So right now when you click on one of these results, you either open it in a new window, replace this window, maybe there are frames. But people, again, have looked at different ways of combining lists with specific results. Here's an example. It's sort of an ugly picture, but they basically expand the full page and allow you as a user to scroll within each of these results as well as down the entire results list. So you see the full text of a page essentially in line. Now there are huge system and performance implications of this, but it is a different way of showing results. Folks have done this in a tabbed way. So here's a query. This is a system called Swinging Google, which doesn't exist anymore, but the results pages were presented in tabs. For each result you saw not only the title, but a bunch of other metadata, like what genre it was, what date it was. So that combines a couple of interesting notions. One is providing richer metadata, and then allowing tabbing to quickly go between items. Another one that Tim Peck looked at is selectively showing more information. So imagine getting a big long list of results. When I hover on one, I can see more information about that without having to go to the full page. Right, so it's sort of a progressive display of more information. It's like tooltips. This one was done in line. So these are all spatial ways of sort of multiplexing multiple inputs. Google actually, for a while, looked at this thing called the Google Viewer. Did people ever look at this? You can go to the Google Viewer. It was in the labs. Set a presentation rate, and what it did was it showed you web results one after another. Okay. So it was temporal multiplexing of results. It's not there anymore, so I don't know if that means that it was even too lame for the labs page or that they're going to try to do something more real with it. But it is another way of showing users more than just a big long list of results. So this showed you the full text of page with a temporal delay between each one. You could stop, you could pause, you could go back. Yeah. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. People have also looked at showing multiple pages with different emphasis for each page. So a couple of the early news browsers did things like this. This is from the Krakatoa Chronicles, where they show the top headlines in somewhat bigger size than some of the smaller headlines. Oh, that was the Krakatoa Chronicle. Which one was this? This was the Goloshinsky system. Okay, so people have tried doing stuff like that to present overviews of multiple kinds of information. If you have some reason to believe that the user is more interested in things early on, you can imagine personalizing search results doing this. So I show you a big long list, and I might devote more screen real estate to things that I think are personally interesting to you. Yeah.
Would this be analogous to sort of what News.net
Here's about it, that kind of thing with a very nice
Yeah.
presentation. Could you, is this essentially that for a website?
This is actually for news.
Could you for a website?
Perhaps. I said these are for news. I'm not sure the extent to which this applies to web search. It might. And the reason I say that is because there's no... It's actually sort of a complex argument about priors on the... So here there's some editorial, or in this case, personalized view of the content that says what's more interesting or important to you, and that's what's used to allocate screen real estate. In web search, I don't know what the analog is. I mean, they've already done their best by ranking from best to worst.
Right, and I'm saying go to those pages, get back a little bit more
Yep.
differentially and lay it out.
You might, yeah. Well, and Tim has a prototype that does some of that, called Pyramid. Pyramid. So, yeah, but it would actually be better if, so for web search, again, this gets back to the notion of information need. For news, a lot of times what people want is to get an overview of what's going on. For web search, if you have a very specific navigational need, something like this may not be as useful, okay? Because what you want to do is identify particular items, not so much get an overview. If you want to get an overview, this may be really interesting. Okay. Highlighting matches. People have done, so mostly you highlight matches by showing where the words match in the little summary. People have done things like this tile bars to show the distribution of matching terms over a document. Allison Woodruff and others at Park did something where they actually modify the web page so as to show the query words in larger font. So you can see the query words and a little bit about the context in which they sit. Patrick has done something very much like this in spirit called Fishnet, which takes a web page, compresses it so that it fits onto a single page or a small device, but keeps highlights the query words so that you see where they are in that larger context. So people have done things to pull in more context and try to give folks an overview. This is particularly useful when you don't know what you're looking at. It may be less useful if you're familiar with the content and know what you're looking at. Integration with metadata. One of the things we've done in Stuff I've Seen when you get search results is show you lots of metadata associated with each result and allow you to sort, filter. It's exactly what the desk bar does. I think it works great for cases where you have reasonably good metadata. It works great when you're familiar with it and may remember metadata as a way to search. So for my email, I often remember who sent me things. It would be interesting to think about applying this kind of metaphor to the web, although I don't know what the right metadata attributes are. I don't know who authored most web pages. I don't know when they were authored. I probably don't know how big they are. But there may be some metadata there that's really useful for refinement. So this is one possibility. Here's another kind of refinement that Ben Schneiderman pioneered called dynamic queries. He shows lots of metadata attributes. So this is for finding houses. This is the distance from where you are. This is the number of bedrooms, the cost. And you can just set little sliders, and they dynamically reduce the search space as you modify the filters. Okay, so if I say I want the cost to be less, then a lot of those little dots will go away. So this, again, is a case where you can quickly and interactively restrict your... This is a way of specifying queries that's very different than typing in, I want houses, cost, less than 50K. It's a very different feel. And it might not apply to web results. It may well apply to searching personalized content. It may not apply to intranets. But it's an interesting way of thinking about what metadata attributes items have and how you can present and filter on them. Tabular views, let's skip that. I just want to show this flamenco interface that Marty Hurst and her colleagues have looked at. I think this is what Ed wants to read next week, where you type in a query, and what you see is the distribution of matches across lots of different metadata attributes. So this is an image search. You type in a query, and you see, the date and the geography and the type of item. And so you can narrow in on any one of those attributes that might be of interest to you. This is a system, what's this called, George? Paper Lens, that for searching over technical papers where you can see for each, you do a query, you can see the distribution of authors, you can see distribution of results over topics by year. So again, it's a way of presenting where the result sets are distributed on metadata attributes that might be metadata attributes that might be useful for filtering. I think this is an interesting example about how to integrate categories and results. Google, in their main web search page, when they used to have categories, they don't anymore, they removed the directory, used to show you the category of search results at the top, as well as as part of each result description. So they devoted part of the little summary for each result to tell you about where it sat in a directory. Okay, yeah. Maybe because you didn't know. I don't know. I don't know. But they went away here. Well, so one of the interesting things is they used to show these category results basically in line. Some of the work that Ed and I did showed that that's about the worst place you could show that information. And this was for general web search. For groups, they still show the categories. So if you type in a query on usability, you see a few groups that are relevant to that. On shopping, if you type in a query, you see how the results are distributed across the categories represented in yet another way. So they have 3 different domains. They use 3 different ways of displaying the category information and integrating it with regular search results. I don't know why it disappeared from this one. Maybe it'll disappear from these others. But even the very simple notion of how you take categorical information and combine it with lists is something that even one company is trying lots of alternatives for.
If you're showing units there for Google, they break out by stories with unlimited metadata.
Yep. I'll add Frugal to that.
I think that for groups, the groups are the categories.
They absolutely are.
And so that has much more meaning than possibly the other.
Yeah, the other category, these categories came from the Open Directory project. It might be that people don't do enough topical searches for that to be useful. It might be that they didn't come up with the right metaphor for showing it. There are lots of ways of coupling the 2 kinds of information, and here are 3 examples. It might just also be that categories don't matter. Topical categories don't matter. And that's what Vivisimo does. Vivisimo actually does something that looks like this, more like this. I'm not sure I'm going to get to the Vivisimo thing, but they dynamically cluster results, show you those categories on the side, and then you can find items within one of the categories in more detail. Yep. Yep. I mean, we have a prototype. MSR China has a prototype. There are a lot of people. Scatter Gather at Park was done probably a decade ago, where they clustered results. Right. So we have some studies on there. In that particular case, there are at least a couple of different things going on. One is how you get the groups. So they are taking the list of results and coming up with ad hoc groups. Another thing you can do is take some of these known groups, like computer, human factors. These are all pre-existing groups, and show where you can use exactly the same presentation technique, but use known groups. There are some experiments where people use known groups, and there you can find, for some tasks, pretty dramatic advantages over just showing a big, long list of results. I don't know of any similar data for on-the-fly clustering. One of the interesting things that happens with the on-the-fly categories is you often get lots of categories that are related, but there's no way of knowing that. So, if you do the Jaguar query, you get cars, enthusiast, S-series, T-series, or S-series, whatever. And there's no way to know that those are all related. you don't have that same problem with pre-established groups. So there's a little work on clustering on the fly. The best data I know is from Etzioni and Zamir, where they did a system called Grouper. It's about the only published data I know. I've actually reviewed 3 papers in the last 6 months on the fly clustering, and I hope at least one of them gets published, so we'll have more data to talk about.
Actually did a comparison of different clustering sites and compared that with Google Node or Node category, and there wasn't really any advantage there.
Normally they're doing some,
No significant advantage.
normally they're doing some of that in their similar pages.
Right. Right. So what was? No. These not this, for this. There's absolutely no clustering in advance.
No, I meant in Google similar pages.
I bet they are not clustering in advance.
No, the recent one was outside the search engine, or the meta search.
Yeah, Vivissimo actually takes, we'll say, the top 200 results that you get back, takes these little snippets, and does text analysis and clustering on those, on the fly.
Yeah, but, well, unless I'm mistaken, when Google tells you how many they found, they're including things that are under the similar pages. The number that you get is an expansion of all the similar pages.
I think there may be 2 notions of similar. Do you mean within the same site? Or, yeah, well, that's different than similar pages, I think.
Where it says similar pages?
That's not what you do. If you click similar pages, you do not get things on the same site. You get things that are similar by content. Yeah, let me just finish. I think I have like one more slide. There are people who are trying to show connections among search results. So Anselm Spory has done some, this is not the best display, but he's done some work looking at meta search, where you imagine you do a query, you find results from 3 different engines. He actually shows you which results come back from all engines, which are unique to one engine, and he has some new techniques for showing that. This is probably, this may be useful in information discovery. I'm not so sure it's useful in some simple kinds of search queries. Cartu and Grocker get lots of play for showing rich interrelationships among search results. So instead of showing a big long list, they show which results are related to each other. In this case, it's highly interactive with Flash, so you can hover over one item, it shows you the items that are most related to that, and you can get sort of linkages among items in that way. Grocker does the same sort of thing. There's a site called 10 by 10 that does this for news. They'll show you a 10 by 10 array of snapshots of today's news, along with keywords that are relevant to each. Again, this is not ideal. I would not use this interface if I were trying to answer a question or find a particular web page. But if you want to do various kinds of information discovery or summarization, this might be an interesting interface to take a look at. Now we're skipping this. Let me just say this and not show too many slides. One of the things that almost nobody supports is allowing users to do anything with the search results. And here's a case where I think Longhorn could have a huge leg up. Right now, you get results. Even if you find exactly what you want, what do? You like copy and paste from the results. You might go to the site, drag that URL in there. There's very, very little support for further organization. And people have looked at ways of doing that. Actually, MSN Search in the old days used to support it better than they do now. They had these little cryptic icons that you could hover over them and they said save, and you clicked it and it said save. And then you had no idea where it went. But but if you actually did find out where it went, for a particular query, you could click all the items you wanted. They were saved in response to that query. It was a great way of doing research. You could actually go back to the query, look at all the items that you had saved. But supporting that kind of richer information work is something that almost nobody does. Compaq had this notion of search pads where you could drag results and put them into a little scratch pad that was for working. Brian Amento and his colleagues at AT&T did the same sort of thing where you could take search results, drag them over here, group them, organize them, get back to these same workspaces. So this is something I think that we could support much more richly than we currently do. Lots of other issues about whether any of this stuff happens client-server, how you integrate multiple types of results, multiple facets, display sizes, and also how you evaluate all of this. I think my bottom line on the evaluation would be you try lots of different methods. You're not going to get by with just focus groups or inviting 8 people into the lab. You need to try things. That's certainly a great first start. You certainly want to start in places where you think users have needs, and you want to make a reasonable first attempt. But you need to then monitor how it's actually used in practice, what kinds of feedback you get, whether alternative techniques are used in qualitatively different ways. And again, lots of seemingly small details really matter. So I think the UI opportunities are terrific. Right now, search is really simple. You get a box, a list, and you get to try again. I think we can do an awful lot better. I mean, it's really hard to imagine anything weirder than this. And I think in thinking about what innovations are really important, one of the things to do is think about, for your user group, what are the real search pain points? What are their problems? Is it finding too much? Is it not finding enough? Is it spelling errors? Is it understanding of how the results fit together? And try to support those. I think they'll be different. I mean, I think internet search is different in many ways than web search. I think searching over my desktop is uniquely different. I know an awful lot about that content, and you better allow me to express that and then use that for presentation. I mean, I really do know a lot about what's there and when I saw email and maybe who sent it to me. And so you want to tap all of those really rich sources. So I think I will just stop with that. And do you want to take, so sorry, I ran a bit long, but I hope this was just a seed for thinking about richer ways of specifying queries and showing results to users. Yeah. What's that? Mm-hmm. Right. So if you bring users, I mean, you have users keep diaries or bring them into the lab. A lot of what they comment about is that the results contain a lot of stuff that they don't want. And it's not just the Jaguar things. It's things like, we all mean Hidalgo, but I don't mean the movie. Or, and clustering is one way to try to do that. Extracting metadata at index time. So it might be that you can know whether a site has to do with history or movies or whatever, and then exposing that metadata either by grouping or filtering or whatever. So yeah, right. So the feedback is another way. And one of the problems, Mizue, I think, did some nice studies where she had folks look at search results and talk about them. And one of the things I remember very distinctly from that is everybody wanted to refine the search results, but they all wanted to do it in different ways. So some wanted stuff near them, some wanted stuff that was commercial because they wanted to buy things. So it may be that there are a smallish number of metadata attributes that one can try to extract automatically at index time that would be really useful for organizing results on the web.
Are we going to have a link to your presentation?
Sure, I can do that. Well, you want to just like put up a site and?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to put together a SharePoint site that we can shove stuff into it. So I should have that up probably by today.
Okay.
Last time you attended.
Oh no. Oh, did I not save the changes? Oh well. Sorry, Ed.
No. Well, that's okay. They recorded it.
Okay. So Ed's job is to send out an email for next week.
I'll send out an email, hopefully with